Hello everyone, this is the second part of writing a practical report video, and you'll know that in the first part we looked at how to write an introduction, aim, hypothesis and the method. We started the results and I touched on the idea of constructing a table with units and a title and then graphing your data. Just before we move on, ensure that you have used the correct graph. Now you can look up how to know this, but as a general rule, if you have two sets of international units, so such as if you can use units for both sets of data, both your dependent variable, which goes on the y-axis, and the independent variable, which goes on the x-axis, if both of those are measurements with units, you're fairly safe in thinking that it will be a line graph or a scatter graph. Okay. If you have categorical data, such as blue eyes, brown eyes, or cats, dogs, so these are distinct categories of data, that is likely to be a column graph, or it will be a column graph, and then a pie chart is when you are presenting fractions of a whole or percentages, and it's unlikely that you're going to use a pie chart in these reports. Most likely is a line graph, so ensure that you can draw that correctly. And the ingredients to getting full marks on a line graph is, if you're drawing by hand, use a pencil and a ruler. Always include a title, always label the axes with the units, and provide a key if necessary. So if you have multiple lines on there, ensure that the reader can see that the red line means pure water and the blue line is salt water, for example. Make sure that your graph is accurate, so you've plotted it correctly. The scale on both of those axes is evenly distributed numbers, so it's 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, not 0, 72, 112. So they're well spaced, and you've used all of the space given, particularly in a test situation. Don't squeeze your graph into the corner, use the space provided so that the reader can actually try and get as much information out and see as much detail as possible. Okay, so that was a quick graphing recap. So let's talk about how to construct a discussion. I break the discussion usually into two sections. The first one is a description of the trends or the patterns that you see in the graph. So if, for example, you are investigating the boiling point of water with different solutes dissolved in the solvent, so different solutions there, you will describe the trend or the lines, and you must use data in this description. So you may find that pure water or tap water boils at a particular temperature and took a particular amount of time to get to that boiling point, whereas salt water may have boiled at a slightly different temperature and may have taken a different amount of time. So describe each line as represented in your graph and use data to support your ideas, okay, not just statements. Once you've described all of that graph, you need to go on and explain why you found this. So you need to actually do a little bit of research. Why might something have affected the boiling point? Why is it that salt water doesn't boil at the same point as tap water, for example? So you need to really research that. Make sure that when you're using the ideas of others or using resources from the internet or from books, you always credit that in a bibliography. So you cite it correctly and you acknowledge that it's not your idea, you have found it somewhere else, and you're very welcome to use that. It's really important that you use additional research in your discussion. The other key things to talk about are errors and improvements. So errors aren't always just mistakes that you made, although they would be classified as human errors. They can also be systematic errors. So if you haven't used the measuring cylinder correctly or measured the volume or the mass of something correctly, and you've done it all the way through the experiment. So every time you've tried to measure the volume of water, it's a little bit lower than it should have been. We call that a systematic error. And you can look up the types of errors yourself, but make sure you describe any errors that you encountered and how you might improve the experiment next time by overcoming those errors. What might you do differently? Have you come up with any ideas for any further research? That's usually something else that we would include in the discussion. And then we'll go on to the conclusion. Now the conclusion is quite succinct. It's just usually a few sentences that refer back to the hypothesis. They describe the trend again, so they reiterate or explain what was found just in a sentence. Did the findings support the hypothesis, and how reliable was your experiment? Were there so many errors that you can't really trust your data, or was it reasonably reliable? There's a little bit at the bottom of here that shows you how to arrange your website, your references. So if you've used books, textbooks, or websites, there's some guidance on how to organize that. And then most importantly, please check the rubric. So you're always aiming for the highest possible number in each of these criteria. So again, ensure that you are meeting this every single time before you submit. So final proofread will help you to achieve success in this report.